I'm going to try to get rid of those boxes. There
This podcast is sponsored by the ValleyGivesBack.org.
For hundreds of years, we brought you the news.
All right, it's too awkward to do that on camera. Welcome to Navel Gazing, Valley Indie Podcast. My name is Eugene Driscoll. I am a reporter with ValleyIndie.org temporarily in Derby, Connecticut, in my basement because of COVID. I've been working out of my basement. This podcast, by the way, like you heard from my daughter, is sponsored by ValleyGivesBack.org. Please visit that website to learn how you can make a lasting difference for the good of the Valley. Also, a quick programming note. The Great Give starts May 4th, 2021. Please support the Valley Indie. In fact, advanced giving, I just combined in advance. I don't know what I'm saying. Advanced giving, Kurt.
Wow.
Starts today, Friday, April 23rd. So anybody who is inclined to donate to the Valley Indie can do so right now at donate.valleyindie.org. But please tune in to Valley Indie Facebook on May 4th and May 5th for a series of live streaming video interviews with various Great Give participants. Okay, today
hold on. Before we get into what we want to talk about, I'm going to issue a challenge that I will donate $1 more than Rick Dunn to the Valley.
Wow. So say that again. Say that again because I stepped on you.
I will donate $1 more than Rick Dunn.
I think I'm on Rick's bad side, so that may just literally be $1. So I don't know what kind of challenge that is, but
that may work out to me. But I know Rick usually, we're usually on and we kind of go back and forth. We try to raise money during, the different segments, but I will raise $1 more than Rick Dunn. So once he's done all that he's done, I will then give you $1 more than that.
Oh, thank you very much. That's to Rick Dunn. All right. So it's my extreme pleasure, by the way, to welcome back to Navel Gazing, the Valley Indie Podcast. Essentially, he was my co-host for a year when he was the first selectman of Seymour. It is a former first selectman of Seymour and currently the chief fiscal officer of Ansonia, Connecticut, Mr. Kurt Miller.
Always a pleasure to be here.
And today we're going to be talking about the proposed 2021, 22, whatever it is, 21, 22 Ansonia budget, and that will go into effect July 1st of this year. But before we do that, I just want to remind people, I actually just got off the phone with a Ansonia resident, and I just want to remind people, let me see if I can share this screen. A couple of public hearings coming up next week in Ansonia, so I'm going to take a little tangent real quick to talk about. There is a public hearing, 6 p.m. Monday, April 26th on Zoom about a proposed motel in Ansonia at 557 Wakely Avenue. I'm going to try to post this podcast as soon as possible. I'm also going to put this on the website as well. But I just want to remind people that is happening 6 p.m. Monday, April 26th. If you have an opinion you want to share about the Ansonia motel, that is the time to do it. So I will stop sharing there. All right. So now on to the topic at hand. There is also a public hearing on the Ansonia budget, the proposed Ansonia budget, scheduled for 6 p.m. Tuesday, April 27th. Again, that's 6 p.m. Tuesday, April 27th. I've been getting these dates wrong a lot, so hopefully I didn't just mess that up.
Nope, you're correct.
That's right. Okay.
Yep.
And again, it would be covering the fiscal year starting July 1st. So from what I understand, Kurt, in Ansonia, the Board of Aldermen set the budget and the mill rate. And so far, that budget, in terms of the process, has been unveiled by the mayor.
Correct.
Reviewed by the Ansonia Board of Apportionment and Taxation.
Correct.
And now we're at the point where it's heading to the Ansonia Board of Aldermen and Alderwomen for final review. Is that essentially what happens?
That is correct. Yes. So they're going to have their public hearing on next Tuesday or Tuesday, depending on when you're listening to this. And from there, they'll take some direction from the residents and then move forward. But I would expect the budget will be completed probably within a month or so. We want to wait to make sure that we have all of the state revenue numbers correct. But I think it's important that while we're waiting for that we take as much feedback and input from the residents as we can to try to incorporate as much of that as possible.
And what I've been hearing, I learned this in Derby and then looked it up and confirmed it. Governor Lamont, I guess at the beginning of this month, modified an executive order or maybe instituted a new one that gives all communities in Connecticut more time, should they choose to use it, to submit and approve to approve a budget. I think it's like June 1st or something like that they have, right?
Yeah, but we're not going to need that. We're actually moving along very nicely in our process. If anything, like I said, we're going to slow the process down a little bit just to make sure that we have all of that information so we can put out the best budget possible.
And so the budget proposal, and this is from previous reporting Valley Indy published, it carries no tax increase. I guess I should note that right off the bat. It keeps the mill rate at 37.8 mills, from what I understand. Again, no tax increase.
Correct.
The budget proposal totals about $59.2 million.
Yep.
It carries a spending increase from the budget in place right now compared to this proposed one of about $1.5 million, or about 2.6% budget to budget increase. Is that right so far?
Give or take. I'm just flipping, but I have the budget up in front of me. Budget summary. Yeah, you're right in that ballpark. Yep.
And I wanted to first focus, Kurt, on that $1.5 million increase, sort of take a big picture look at this. Can you break down what's the spending components of that budget to budget $1.5 million increase?
I guess we'll take a step back. One of the things that the mayor really wanted to accomplish, he's had a vision and a plan that he's been working on over the last 6 or 7 years, and that was to kind of put a good foundation in place for the city of Ansonia. It wouldn't be a podcast with you and I if we didn't talk about things like fund balance and debt ratio and so on. But the underlying financials in the city of Ansonia are actually very strong, and that was proven with the S&P rating that the city received back in January, where it reaffirmed, our AA- status. So with that foundation in place, the mayor wanted to continue to move the city forward, and doing that as a part of that plan is, its infrastructure, its technology, it's reinvesting in the city, reinvesting in the people. So a good chunk of that increase is capital funding and debt service. So those are some of the biggest drivers of that 1.5 million. So again, we're looking at reinvesting in the city with the new police station. We're going to spend roughly $16 million on that, which will be fantastic for the city. And then we're also making investments in just necessary equipment across the board, whether it be public works, different pieces of equipment, technology, so on and so forth. So, this is kind of what we'll call it step 2 or 3 of the mayor's plan as to how he wanted to move the city forward. And that's the biggest driver of this 1.5 million increase. Plus, we wanted to fully fund the Board of Education. That was a priority for the mayor. We wanted to make sure that the Board of Education had enough money in these trying times. It's certainly been a challenge for them over the last year or so, educating, our kids with COVID and all of the restrictions and everything along those lines. The mayor has a great relationship with Superintendent Tabacco. They talk quite frequently. They work together, and essentially what you're seeing in this budget, and something that really hasn't been publicized all that much, is the Board of Education is going to be giving a large sum of money back to the city. The city, in turn, is going to give that right back to the Board of Education. So,
and that was a deal that was like worked out a year or two ago. There's a specific name for that.
Oh, no. This is something that just came about this year. Conversations between the mayor and the superintendent. The superintendent reached out to the mayor and said, listen, we're not going to spend, all of our money. And he didn't want to just, a lot of boards of education, they'll just spend every nickel because there's concerns that they're not going to get it back. But again, they have an excellent working relationship. They had those conversations, and the superintendent said, listen, if we give money back to the city, is there a chance that we can get some of that money back next year to continue doing projects and things like that, the mayor was 100% on board with that.
Is that,
So-
I'm looking at the budget right here. It might be hard for people to read. And this is the budget that's available on the City of Ansonia website as of Friday, April 23rd. So I don't know if this is completely up to date, but this is what the public has at the moment. It says the return of surplus capital expenses. Is that what you're talking about? $404,000?
That's correct. Yep, because that's a show of good faith by the Board of Education, that they want to do the right thing, that they understand that everyone's in this together, the municipal side, the Board of Education side, and the more we work together, the better the lines of communication, the better the results are going to be. And this city, unfortunately, has seen in the past what happens when there is a breakdown of that communication, but that is not the case anymore. Those lines are open. Mayor, as I said, the mayor and the superintendent talk quite frequently, and this is the collaboration that you see. The mayor was extremely appreciative of the fact that the Board of Education would be giving that money back, and he in turn wanted to return that favor and say, if you're going to do the right thing, then we're going to absolutely do everything we can in our power to make sure that you're fully funded to your request, which is what this budget does.
And then in terms of looking at my notes here, Ansonia Public Schools, the school budget is roughly $33.6 million, which is about $1 million increase or 3.25% more than the current budget. And that's what, looking right here, although it's a little hard to read, that looks like what they requested just about, or it's a little different on here, but it's roughly the request?
It's the request, yes.
Okay, gotcha. Let me stop sharing that screen. And what about in terms of the $1.5 million increase? I saw that wages seem to be going up. Is there? I imagine that's a union contract, and then the non-union employees also get whatever percent increase the union employees get. That's usually the case in these municipalities. Do you roughly know how much wages are increasing? Like what percent salary increase did everybody get in Ansonia this year?
A bunch of different contracts have been negotiated over the last year or so. I would say on average, the raises are about 2% in total. Some are broken up. They get 1% on July 1st. They get an additional 1% on January 1st. Some, the raises are just all given on July 1st. So I would say in average, you're looking at about 2% a year is the increase, somewhere in that ballpark for our union employees. For our non-union employees, similar. Not all of them receive raises. They understand with the pandemic going on, with things being tight, that not everyone got raises. And then we have some folks who are on contracts, and their raises were dictated by the contracts.
Okay, and then I just have I want to skip around a little bit, and then I'll throw it over to you again. Although you've already mentioned bond rating, so that already happened.
I'll mention that 3 or 4 times, Eugene.
Thank you for mentioning debt service right at the top of this podcast. I really do appreciate that in terms of listenership, because that's
debt ratio is something that is very exciting and something that needs to be talked about more.
With sound effects. Okay, so State Rep Cara Rochelle the other day, April 21st, specifically on Facebook, had a image saying that Ansonia is receiving $5.4 million from the American Rescue Plan. Mm-hmm. Is that included in this? Because this is the big question that I hear in Derby as well. They're not quite ready to put their budget together yet because they sense a windfall coming down because of COVID and all the extra funding that's coming, especially by the way of Alliance District or economically distressed communities such as Derby and Ansonia. So that $5.4 million, is that included? Is that what you anticipated? How's it work out? What's it like putting together a budget when there's supposed to be all this federal money coming down?
The $5.4 million, again, there's still a lot of uncertainty with that. Actually what we're going to get, how we're going to receive it, how we're going to be able to spend it. So we did not include any of the American Recovery Act funds in the budget. Again, that's more than likely going to be a one-time revenue source, or maybe they'll break it up over 2 years. Again, we're not 100% sure how that's going to be used. So to put that into a budget as a revenue stream is not the best way to do things. Again, because at some point that revenue goes away and your expenses are still there. So we are looking at that money at the mayor's urgence, again, to go towards more capital improvements, whether it be roads, purchasing of a fire truck, different things like that. So again, we're trying to be very prudent with how we use this money. In the budget, we had to base a lot of it on the governor's recommendations. We did receive about 1.6 million in what's known as distressed municipality money. No one can answer the question, is that 1.6 million a part of the 5.4 million? We only budgeted about half of that money in the budget. The governor's projecting that money would be available to Ansonia over 2 years. So the goal was to use that and tie it towards some of the capital purchases and things like that we have, so we don't have that funding cliff in a year or two that causes more budgetary problems, more budgetary inflexibility.
And just one follow-up about that. In Derby last night, I was watching their aldermen talk about this money that's coming down because of COVID relief and everything we've been going through the last year. And is there any particular way, let's say you pass the budget and then you're going to get a sense of how you can use this money and exactly how much is coming down. Do you have to set up a new spending process or a new approval process to allocate this money? Like, how are the towns going to do that where there's millions that are coming, but you're not budgeting it, but it could arrive? How does that work?
To be honest, I don't think anybody has a lot of idea yet how all that's going to work, because there hasn't been a lot of information. We all understand that money's coming. We hear that money's coming. We're all being given dollar amounts. But again, until we find out exactly how the money can be spent, it's a little premature to be actually spending it. We've taken, the mayor's charged some of his senior staff to start looking at different potential uses for this money. And again, one-time purchases, needed capital, reinvestments in specific projects and things like that we have going on. That's how he envisions this money being used. But again, it's all going to come down to what the rules are attached to how the money can be spent.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen for a second. Let's see if I can do this. One thing I wanted to ask you about were, say, Public Works. Mm-hmm. It looks like, if I'm reading this correctly, they're taking a dip, a pretty significant dip from the current budget, which is right here, which it looks like 2.1 million down to about 2 million. And if I think the wages are taking, are there any like layoffs happening there? You're not replacing somebody coming back? No,
again,
what's going on there?
You have to take a look at, the budget is very different than it's looked in the past. One of the things that the mayor wanted from the get-go was to make a budget document that was a little bit easier to understand for the average person. The old document, if you remember, kind of had things lumped together that didn't necessarily go together. So
wait, I've got a sound effect for this. You're calling me an idiot is what you're saying.
No.
Jesus, Tom, I was just speculating about a hypothesis. I know I don't know nothing.
All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was just waiting to do that.
So no, he wanted to have things grouped together that go together. So, as an example, the old budget, it had debt service, it had employee benefits, and it had a few other things all lumped together into kind of one section of the budget. And that really doesn't make any sense if you're trying to truly understand what the impact of any budget increases are. So we spent a lot of time going through, and what you'll see, there was things that were taken out of this budget that were moved to their own departments. I mean, just below it, I know it's hard to see, things like waste collection, city buildings, city utilities, street lights. A lot of that stuff used to all be jammed into the Public Works budget. But we wanted to take that out. There was also an old pension plan payment that was in that budget that's been moved down to the bottom, where we took all of our pension contributions, whether it be to the old police department plan, the old city plan, or the current MERS plan. That has all been put together. Plus, the mayor was very concerned about making sure during the pandemic that we kept all of our employees on staff, that we didn't lay anyone off. And we were able to do that. We did have to move some people around to different jobs just to keep them busy, because obviously, the library, as an example, wasn't open to the public, so it didn't make any sense to have the full library staff there when we can utilize some of those employees in other spots. And the union was very good to work with in regards to that, because again, we were keeping everyone employed. So
you're just going to ignore him. That you're going to ignore the fact I have my look. I'm saying, hold on, let me interrupt for a second.
I didn't realize. I'm looking out the window. I get mesmerized by looking out on Main Street because there's a flag flying, there's trees, there's birds.
I miss Main Street, Ansonia. But like one thing I was going to focus on here, it's interesting, just as someone who just read this budget in like the last hour, there are actual cuts. I mean, library, the approved funding from the current budget, library wages looks like it's going from $407,000 all the way down to $355,000.
Well, that we'll address that on our way. That is one of the positions that I just mentioned. There was a staff member in the library who's been moved over to City Hall. So it didn't make sense to keep the budget, the revenue, or excuse me, the expense on the library side. That's not fair. So we moved it over into the finance department salary line, because that's where the person currently is. We don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic. We don't know how quickly things are going to open up. And even when things do open up, we don't know how it's going to look going forward. So the money is still there. The employee is still there. It's just in a different budget.
How about recreation? I've seen some posts on social media saying, so it looks like I'm looking at this right here. And again, I'm just looking at it, but like basketball was fun. It doesn't look like it's getting funded in the budget that I'm looking at. Ansonia youth football, little league, soccer, girls softball. What's going on there?
Philosophical change with how it's been done in the past, something that the mayor and the alderman wanted to do. That money has been taken and some has been added to it, and it's been put in. It's an individual fund. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom into the boat section, you'll actually see a line there. What organizations will do now is they will essentially apply to the alderman or a subcommittee or a committee that the alderman will create and discuss the amount of need that they have. And then the alderman will be able to award money to these different groups based on that need. They're going to have to show, some of their financials, what their actual need is, so on and so forth, because we want the money to be focused to the groups that really need it. And just to give kind of a blanket request doesn't seem to make sense, because again, where do you stop? If you're giving to Little League and to basketball and to soccer and to football and to cheerleading and, Cub Scouts and Girl Scouts, and now a fine arts group comes along, and it just continues and continues and continues. And where do you say no? So
where did that idea come from? That was at the alderman or boat?
That was kind of a joint conversation with the mayor and the alderman. I know there's been a lot of conversation with the alderman about how youth sports is handled in the city. There's been several meetings, conversations, things like that, about trying to set something up, whether it's a governing body or whatnot. So that's sort of where all of that came in. It's these are things that are constantly evolving. There's a lot of open conversation, a lot of dialogue, and the aldermen are working hard to try to make things as best they can. And that is certainly the preference of the mayor as well.
And I wanted to ask you about the police department. I published a letter to the editor this week that I had received from Brian Perkins, who was questioning the fact that this budget in its current form doesn't fully fund the request for funding from the police department. And if I'm talking like a bureaucrat, that means, for anybody listening, if I'm the police department and I say I want $100 for next year, and then the powers that be say, well, you're not going to get 100, we'll give you 75. So there's still a funding increase. And I think this blew up in the comment section before it became a little, as Facebook tends to do. But what's the rationale there? And then Kurt, I don't mean to put you in the position because you're not the political guy here. You're the finance guy.
Right.
But what's going on with the police budget? And I ask only because there is, I mean, one thing we've seen in Ansonia and Derby and all across Connecticut, people breaking into cars, it seems nonstop. Ansonia has its share of violent crime, off North Main Street over the last couple of years. As has Derby. So, people might get nervous when the police department says we need this much to run our department, and they're not quite getting that much. And it looks like some of the things that were shaved were like for car tires and maintenance of vehicles and things like that. Do you think that money is going to be restored, or what's the rationale behind not fully funding the PD request for next year?
Well, to your point, I mean, I'm not a political guy anymore. So I'm just going to talk about the actual facts of what it is, and then people can determine from that what they want. The police department budget is increasing about $156,000 fiscal year to fiscal year. There has been no layoffs. It is fully staffed as it was this current year. Will be fully staffed next year. There's no changes. The police department requested a third lieutenant, which would be 4 administrators. The mayor did not think that was necessary. That position was $111,037. So of the $278,000 cut, we'll call it, from what the police department requested to what they actually got, 111,000 of it was that. Another 134,000 came from changing the way that we account for our patrol division. Patrol division is fully funded. We'll have the same number of patrol officers that we had last year. Will be the same number that we'll have this year. The city never took into account workers' comp, and then the changeover when an officer leaves and how they're replaced. So we've had 2 officers on the last month or so that have retired, and they're going to need to be replaced. Now, when you have officers at the top step and you're replacing them, first it's going to take 6 to 9 months to even get the replacement in and out on the street. They're going to come in at a lower rate, so you need to factor that in. And then also you need to take into account for workers' comp. If an employee goes out on workers' comp, it's paid out of a different part of the budget. So that is taken into account. So that $134,620 to be exact was the calculations that we went through to take all of that into account. So of that 278,000, that's $245,000. So what was not granted to the police department on their request is $32,250 out of $3,271,049, or 0.01%. So for people to say that the mayor isn't fully funding the police department is just statistically, it's not even correct. And this also takes into account the unfunded mandate that we received from the state of Connecticut with the police accountability bill that at a minimum has added $80,000 to the police department budget. And I could see that number climbing to as high as $100,000.
And that's for dash cams, body cams,
Body
is that the biggest?
cams, extra training, so on and so forth. So for someone to say, that the mayor, that the Board of Aldermen, that BOAT is not fully funding the police department is just irresponsible. And again, I'm not going to get into the politics of it because that's what it is. It's political. If you go back to the public meeting that was held, the chief raised these concerns as he should, but then it was followed very closely by Lieutenant Williams saying that, no, hold on, I had the conversation, with me, and Lieutenant and I would communicate quite frequently, mostly via email and things, but where we talked specifically about that because he raised the question, hey, Kurt, what's going on with the patrol? Am I going to be able to hire people? I said, Lieutenant, you can bring in your full complement of patrol officers. We're just looking at it a very different way. And Lieutenant Williams articulated that. The mayor understands that there's concerns from the residents with crime. And he wants to make sure that he's putting as many boots on the street as possible, I guess, for lack of a better term. So that's why when he had to prioritize kind of what he wanted to accomplish, he thought it made more sense to have the full complement of patrol and not fund that extra administration position because of the stress that the police accountability bill has placed on the police department budget. So again, I'm not going to get involved in the politics of it because I know we're
every time you say that, you are
the crazy season. But listen, people can write what they want in these op-eds, and as a person who's written many op-eds in his day, they're all slanted. They're trying to put something out there, but I just want to put the actual facts out there. 0.01% is what it is. So,
and in terms of the police accountability bill, I just want to mention, because I'll get emails as well. In terms of the body cam stuff, the Ansonia is poised to get 50% reimbursed that first year. That's the idea, from what I understand, right?
Potentially. But hey, the municipal level, we're still, when the state of Connecticut increased the sales tax, and that money was supposed to come directly back to the towns and cities 4 years ago. Still haven't seen it. And in the governor's proposal, he's pushing that out another 2 years. So, when it comes to state funding, I believe it when I see it arrive.
Okay, and I just want to remind people that the public hearing on this budget, and go to the City of Ansonia website. You can read over these documents yourself, and then you can come out to Zoom, actually, 6 p.m. Tuesday, April 27th. Again, it's 6 p.m. Tuesday, April 27th for the public hearing on this budget. Where and show up. I mean, I was just talking to somebody. There's sometimes there's an impression among people that it's already decided. They're not going to. I mean, politicians do on the local level. Their ears go up when people show up. So I encourage people to participate. All right. So those are all really my questions on the Ansonia budget. Before I let you go, Chief Fiscal Officer Miller, is there anything else you wanted to add about the Ansonia budget that perhaps I have not asked?
I just want to stress, and I know, Mayor Cassetti in the past is, people have challenged his budgeting, his thinking, his way of doing things. He has a very clear vision of what he wants. Coming from my old position to this position, obviously it was hard going from being the guy in charge to now just being a guy who works for the guy. But I will say this, his vision is very clear, and it's enjoyable for me to do my job because he's we talk every day. He makes sure I understand what his goals are. The mayor is very open to feedback, which is good. So when we were putting this budget together, there was a lot of us, providing feedback, challenging each other, pushing back. The mayor took all of that information in. And at the end of the day, he made the final calls on all these things to make sure that this budget matches the vision that he has. I mean, he has big plans for the city of Ansonia. And, I talked earlier about the different steps. This is probably step 2 or 3 of a 6 or 7 step plan, where he wants to continue to reinvest in the city. Our underlying financials are very strong. Our cash position, stands right around 10%. I'm not going to go over and over. Our debt ratio is a little less than 3. We got a good bond rating.
One thing I wanted to ask you, because I forgot to, and it's something that used to come up years ago. When Mayor Cassetti and his administration first took office, the criticism was that, okay, you had a big fund balance. The Cassetti administration, there was a fund balance when they came in, and every year they were drawing from the fund balance to keep the taxes low, and eventually that runs out. You can only do that for so long. But I did notice the fund balance now is at 10%, right? How is that happening?
Well, in the past years, they did use the fund balance to invest revenue into the budget. But, I would argue they did that with a plan in place to stabilize the mill rate, to make the city of Ansonia more attractive for economic development. And I think, over the 7 or 8 years before I got here, you've seen a lot of this development coming in, and there's definitely been some excitement. The grand list now is up over $1 billion. I believe it was down as around 700,000. Or 700 million, excuse me. So to pick up $300 million in the grand list over 5 or 6 years is actually quite impressive, and that is what's allowing stability to this budget going forward now. So the reinvestment that the city made in itself has allowed there to be stability moving forward. So we've been stepping off of the use of fund balance over the last 3 years now, and you'll notice fund balance use is tied specifically to contingency and to one-time purchases. So again, this budget is no longer reliant on investment from the fund balance to keep it stable, which is what the mayor had intended to do from day one. Maybe it took him an extra year or two longer than he had planned to get there. But the goal that he had is here. And now that that foundation is set and built, now the reinvestment into the city begins. So it's a very positive thing. So while maybe everyone doesn't agree with the steps that the mayor took early on, I think everyone can agree now that the outcome is exactly what the city of Ansonia needed.
Okay. And with that, Kurt Miller, I want to thank you. Seriously, thank you for taking at least a half hour to go over this budget with me. And I hope it helps people to be more informed or slightly more informed, or at least to be able to form their own opinion and show up for the public hearing that's coming up Tuesday, April 27th, 6 p.m. again on Zoom. Check the City of Ansonia website for the specific Zoom information. So with that, Kurt, I want to say thank you.
It is my pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the time and giving us the opportunity to talk about the mayor's budget and his vision for the city of Ansonia.
No problem.